Hey folks, this is Clayton Collins, your host for the Housing News Podcast. And today we are going to expand your knowledge base. We're going to take this conversation a little bit further out in the housing world to help you better understand the landscape of housing in 2023. We are often here talking about the single family residential market of new and existing home sales. Sometimes we venture to multifamily, but today we venture to manufactured housing and learn about how one operator is building a business that really improves communities and brings a really affordable option to the housing market. Our guest today is Robbie Pratt, the CEO and co-founder of Havenpark Communities. Robbie brings a lot of knowledge that, frankly, I just didn't have on the landscape of the manufactured housing ecosystem. We learn about what percent of the market is manufactured versus the stick built or concrete block built inventory that we talk about every day, and the differences between modular and manufactured, and some of the terminology that we're hearing out there, like industrialized and factory built housing. Robbie walks us through the types of communities that he's investing in and helping build, but also talks us through the considerations from a consumer perspective. So how these manufactured homes appreciate over time, the useful life, and the financing options. I hope you enjoy today's conversation with Robbie Pratt, the co-founder and CEO of Havenpark Communities. Hey, Robbie, welcome to Housing News.
Hey, thank you. Great to be here.
So, Robbie, I'm thrilled to have you as a guest today. The focus in the housing industry has been on a lot of things in the last year, interest rates, inventory, tech, innovation. But one of the topics that keeps popping up is affordability, and folks across the housing industry are looking for answers to inventory problems and affordability problems. And the topic of manufactured housing keeps coming up. So I'm excited to have you to learn more about your business, Havenpark, and some of the knowledge and thesis that you bring to the housing market.
Well, great. I'm excited to be here today, and I think there's it is a pressing problem, a growing problem. And I think manufactured housing has a pretty elegant solution. So excited to kind of share some of the things we're seeing, some of the dynamics we're seeing in the space, and perhaps where it could solve a lot of the issues we're facing here.
So let's start by kind of laying the groundwork and talking about the new home construction ecosystem. And I don't know if you're armed with exact numbers, but in general terms, like kind of what's the percentage of homes that are stick built frame houses or concrete block kind of versus the industrialized or factory built housing ecosystem?
Well, it's certainly the vast majority. There's different numbers out there. The most commonly cited number is about 20 million units of manufactured housing in America today. And so
that's all units, existing inventory, and stuff coming to the market now.
Correct. Okay. Now, if you go back to the 70s, there was a steady progression of new starts, or in our industry, we call it shipped units, factory built homes that were shipped. It was a steady incline or increase year over year from the 70s clear to about almost the year 2000, the late 90s. And in that point, we were at annual shipments, or in vernacular of single family, annual starts of 400,000 units. So it was pretty high volume. There was just like the single family sector experienced really a crisis of loans, of credits. There was a chattel crisis as well. And so we saw that number drop. It plummeted from about 400,000 down to about 40,000. And then really has slowly been building its way back up. We're back up at about 100,000 units shipped, a little over 100,000 a year. But it's still really just a shadow of its former self, of what the potential is to be able to bring new units to market.
So, Robbie, what was the timing of that peak to trough change in annual production volume in the manufactured housing space?
So you saw a pretty steady increase in production and manufactured housing starts up through the late 90s. Right around the year 2000, you saw a drop, pretty precipitous drop, and continued to drop through the early 2000s. Trough was probably right around that 2005, 2006 mark. And then there was kind of a steady, very, very slow increase again. And then that picked up really recently. Really, it was 2016, 17. You start to see a pretty good increase, and then it's been greatly accelerated through COVID as well.
So the timing of that kind of downward trajectory of production, it kind of sounds like it might correlate to the heydays of the single family days and the subprime credit. Was the single family market influencing demand on the manufactured side, or was there another driver of that industry trend?
It certainly was an impact. You talk to operators who had large scale operations during those years, and they'll tell you that there were people coming in that were making $25,000, $30,000 a year. They had their single wide, they're making their payment on it, and they just kind of throw the keys and the title there and say, "Hey, I got approved for $175,000 brick home 3 miles away," and they would turn in the title and that was it, right? So there were that certainly when you had such loose credit in the single family, it definitely loose underwriting. It definitely hurt manufactured housing in those years.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I was out at the California MBA event recently, and I was talking to a friend who's working on pulling together an event in Detroit to showcase manufactured housing. And he was telling me a little bit about the vernacular and the difference between manufactured and modular, and how a lot of folks in the industry are using the terms industrialized or factory built. What should we better understand about the different types of manufactured inventory in 2023?
Well, I think you could probably classify them into two main subgroups. People talk about modular. You'll hear modular and you'll hear manufactured housing. At the end of the day, they're very close relatives. You do have some slight technical differences between the two. Probably the biggest difference, though, is that modular housing, typically, this isn't always the case, it's typically installed on a permanent foundation.
Okay.
Permanent concrete foundation. Whereas manufactured housing, again, this is typically, not always, there are some exceptions, but manufactured homes are typically installed in such a way that they can be moved. They typically are not moved, but they can be moved. And so there's certainly, in both cases, there are very stringent regulation in many cases in a lot of states for manufactured housing. It's overseen at a federal level through HUD. If HUD is not overseeing it, typically the states will have their own set of requirements. But really, it comes down to the way that I would say those are the two branches: modular and manufactured.
And is there, okay, so I've also heard construction folks talk about like some of the factory built components that are still like assembled on site. So like a step between modular and stick built. Would you consider that a close relative as well? Or is that a totally different part of the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think in our world where you have construction that occurs on site, it's typically in the modular world, it's going to be around the actual foundation, the actual installation and fixing that to the real estate. On the manufactured side, think of we call it multi-section. In kind of the old vernacular, you may call it a double wide. There is some assembly required. Let's say, so there's a little bit of work to do as far as mating the both sections. There's going to be a little bit of internal work. Remember, these are moving down freeways, and there's bumps and a little bit of jostling and jolts, and so you will have some minor repairs that need to be done when those are installed and set up. But what sometimes on the manufactured housing side, what people forget is um, these are really it's a full throated construction project to have a home fully set up. There's a lot of just like you would prep a site for a stick built home. There's quite a bit of site prep required. There's in most cases um, there are piers that need to be poured. There are footings. There's the securing and fastening, the tie down. There's we call it the block level set, and then you have the wraparound perimeter in the vernacular in our space is skirting for that. And then you have all the additional items. You have connecting to all the utilities, all the setup of air conditioning unit. You'll have the patios, the decks, the awnings. Maybe you have garage, all the flat work involved. So there's quite a bit of on-site labor and coordination, and frankly, a lot of different contractors. I mean, you really need to have, in some shape or form, a general contractor that's spearheading this, and you're kind of coordinating with a number of subs, much as you would with the kind of foundation of a stick-built home.
Yeah, seems like it's quite a departure from like the mobile home or the double wide of yesteryear. I've seen some of this product a couple years ago. I went down to the National Association of Home Builders show and saw some of the manufactured product out like demoed in the parking lot. That's pretty phenomenal. Like very hard to, not paying very close attention. You could very easily think you're walking through what someone would consider a traditional stick built or even a custom home with some of the details that are going into these properties. What's driven the evolution of like what manufactured, may have been in the heyday in the 80s and 90s versus what we're seeing in market today?
I think you had, in the 80s and 90s, what you had is, as oftentimes is the case in a capitalist society, or free market. I think you probably had the pendulum just swing a little bit too far. I think the incentives were probably a little bit misaligned for a lot of the manufacturers of these. I think there's certainly needs to be, when it involves living space, there certainly needs to be probably a sweet spot of regulation, right? I think too much regulation, you have the cost balloons out of control, but really no regulation can certainly have its problems as well. And I think those were days where the regulation was certainly lower. I think what the market demanded was probably a lower bar. I will say that today, the manufactured homes today, as you referenced, alluded to, they're heads and shoulders above what the product that was created in the 90s and early 2000s. I mean, you have really every finish and feature that you would have access to in an entry level home, and in most markets, you're talking entry level. That's code for $300,000 to $600,000. I mean, it's this type of home and the finishes that you can expect that is available today, really across the board with every major manufactured housing factory today. And so I think I think the bar has been raised, both on the safety side, on these, just kind of having a product that is going to last, it's stable, but also consumer, tastes. And really, I think the industry has really, met the challenge of, met the moment of what consumers are looking for today. And so it's a great option, and it can compete with, I would put it up with, the ability to compete with entry level housing across the spectrum, whether that's apartments or single family.
Are there any regional considerations for manufactured? I'm kind of thinking through like weather, climate, natural disaster, and what are any drivers there that influence where more adoption or opportunity lies?
Yeah, I mean the first consideration is just logistics. It's not cheap to ship these things down the freeway, and so there's a very hard cost to that. If you have a manufactured home community in the state of Maine, you don't want to be sourcing your homes out of Mississippi plant,
Yeah.
right? That's not practical from a cost perspective. So there certainly are regional. You want to understand who your regional factories are, and really in almost every region of the country, you do have a factory within typically 2 to 5 hour drive. There are some exceptions to that, but generally. That said, I will say that there are hubs in our industry of where these homes are built. The biggest hub in the country really is in northern Indiana. Northern Indiana is kind of the hub for the RV industry, and as a result, they're kind of sister industries, and so the craftsmanship and the knowledge and the workforce required to build out RVs is very, very similar to manufactured houses. And so for that reason, you have a good concentration there in northern Indiana. So I would say that's the biggest hub. After that, there are a couple others. There are some big ones in Texas. There are some big ones in Tennessee and in other parts of the South. And then there's kind of a smattering after that, really throughout America. But you typically will be able to find a factory that can meet your needs, that can get a home to you within usually about a 5 to 6 hour drive. Sometimes it's further, but usually that's the geographic reach.
And outside of like the expense and logistics of transporting a home further than 5 or 6 hours, am I right that there's some like interstate regulation on like how far, like how many state lines you can cross or how far you can actually move manufactured real estate?
There can be a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's state by state. One of the big challenges you get is there are wind zones and then there are temperature zones, freeze zones. And so if you're in a zone, they have it kind of the tier, I forget the exact tiering, but it's kind of like zone 1 is kind of the Sun Belt, and then zone 2, and then zone 3, you're up in, the snow belt. And, it's kind of a red flag if you're ordering a home in the snow belt from a Sun Belt factory. It typically just, it's not practical. And could it be done? It probably could be done, but it's just, you rarely see it. Just the homes are built to different specs. And so you certainly want to make sure that if you're new to the business, you want to really understand what are the specs required for your geography, both on the wind, that includes the weight load of the roofs, among other, areas, and just make sure you're in compliance of all those laws. There's a lot of them, and the factories can help guide you through all that.
Okay, so let's talk a little about financing. I feel like that's one of the areas it's a little lesser understood in the manufactured space, especially for single family folks like myself. So tell us about what financing options look like in manufactured.
So I'll break this up into 2 types of manufactured homes. So the first type would be you buy a piece of land and you have a home installed on that land. So that would be considered, when you're going for a loan, you would have access to a conventional real estate loan.
Yep.
So that's going to be much easier. You're going to have better rates. The second type is where you are getting a loan on the home, but you don't actually own the land. And this is common in manufactured home communities where the operators will own the actual real estate. So they'll own the dirt, they'll own that site, they'll own the infrastructure. And then the resident will bring in a home and they will own the actual home. So there's a relationship there of of a land lease relationship. In that case, the resident would have what's called access to what's called chattel financing. And so this is a different type of loan. It's not a real estate loan because there's no real estate. That home can technically be moved. It seldomly is, but it can be moved. And so it's going to be a different suite of lenders. Those lenders are typically looking for a couple of things. They want an amortization period that's a little bit shorter. So you usually don't see 30-year. What's more common is probably 20. Sometimes you'll see up to 25, but I would say 15 to 25 is more common. The reason for that is the useful life of a manufactured home is typically a little bit shorter than it is for a single family home. And then also you don't have the real estate, which when you peel back the layers, a lot of the value increase on these homes comes on the actual real estate side. So it's going to be a little bit shorter AM. The rates are going to be a little higher. So typically you're seeing a 200 to 400 basis point premium for the consumer on what they would see on a conventional, call it an FHA loan, agency-backed loan. Again, the reason for that is, it's not technically real estate. It is private property. And so the liquidity pool is just a little bit shallower, a little bit smaller. And as a result, there's a risk premium that the lenders will demand. So, right now, if you're getting a 6% loan, on your single family on a 30-year AM, 95%, leverage, you're probably getting about an 8 to 9% financing, probably 90% leverage, and probably you can go 15 up to 25-year AM on manufactured housing.
Who are the dominant players in that chattel space?
The big players, the biggest player would be 21st Mortgage and Triad. I think those two are probably the kind of 800-pound gorillas in the industry.
Okay.
There are a number of others that are kind of in that next. I'll put them in that next tier. Cascade, Oxford. There are a number of other players, and then depending on where you are in the country. There are a lot of regional banks that will finance. If you get into the kind of Mountain West states, into the Pacific Northwest, Pacific area, very common to find regional banks that will finance, and sometimes they'll actually provide the best rates possible because there's kind of some mission driven motivation with some of those banks as well for their communities. So. It really depends on where you are in the country, but I would say from a national perspective, 21st Mortgage and Triad Financial Services are the two big ones.
Okay, so if you're taking the route where you're buying the manufactured house and it's located in a community where you're leasing your land, you're going to have the chattel loan through one of the national players like Triad or a regional bank, and then a monthly lease payment to the community owner, the landowner. Is that the right structure? Like they're separated out?
That's correct. So think of living in let's just say a townhouse, right, in an HOA. You would be paying your mortgage on the townhouse, but then you would be paying separately your HOA fee, and also your property taxes, and then your insurance and so forth.
Yeah.
So the homeowners that live in a manufactured home community, they're going to be paying their mortgage and their insurance with that. But they're also going to be paying, instead of their property taxes on the real estate and an HOA fee, they're just going to pay what's lumped into a site fee.
Okay. So, and then on the other option, which I think is pretty prevalent and common here in Texas, if someone buys land, be it half an acre or 50 acres, and places a manufactured home on it, they'd have the option to access conventional financing, potentially through Fannie or Freddie, for the land plus house. So it's treated very much like a traditional single family stick built home.
Correct. And I'm not sure it's the exact same program as what you see with a conventional single family, but I know that there are programs that are mimic very closely that type of a structure.
We may have just gotten back from Gathering of Eagles, but we're not done with events for 2023 yet. This October, we're headed right back to Austin, Texas for HousingWire Annual, and we want to see you there. We've got a power-packed agenda with content such as our Women of Influence speakers, peak performer playbooks, CEO playbooks, and more to propel your company forward, as well as a bunch of networking events. Because this event is open to real estate executives, mortgage, title, and everyone in between, you really have the opportunity to network with people from all across the housing ecosystem. If you want to learn more about the event, or if you're already ready to get registered, head over to housingwire.com on the events tab and you can learn all about it. Not to mention, if you're an HW Plus member, you're going to get 50% off your ticket. So get registered for HW Plus and get registered for the event so we can see you out in Austin.
Okay. Well, now you're giving me a tip to something I need to have the HousingWire newsroom dig a little deeper into, because I want to understand that now. We should be reporting on that that area. So you talked a little bit about useful life, and one of the promises of homeownership and the reason that so many folks consider it the American dream is the appreciation. So let's talk about what home appreciation and equity looks like in the manufactured ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a great topic and a greatly misunderstood topic. So I think the conventional wisdom is that a mobile home or a manufactured home goes down in value. That's the conventional wisdom. And I would say that is true in a vacuum. The problem is these homes, they're not placed in a vacuum. They're placed on real estate that has value. And so what we've seen over the past 5 years, there's been a couple of studies that have been released, and I can try to dig these up and send these later. But two large studies, they were kind of a 5-year or 10-year analysis, and this was even pre-COVID, kind of controlled for that. And what they found is that really across every state in America, the lower 48, I think, was the study. The resale value of a manufactured home has gone up significantly. In fact, it's tracked nearly very tightly correlated to the appreciation in single family home values. Now, I think there's a couple of reasons for that. When you look at a manufactured home community, let's say you purchase a home and you bring it in, what really are you getting with living there? Well, you own the home, so presumably you own it. You're going to try to take pretty good care of it and maintain it properly. So that's kind of a given. But the next is, where is that location? Remember, manufactured housing communities were largely built in the 60s, 70s, 80s. They started to slow down in the 80s. By the 90s, it had really almost come to a dead stop. And really by the early 2000s, that was kind of it. NIMBYism took over. And it is with great rare exception that you see a manufactured home community built today. Now, when they were issuing zoning in those years, they didn't give zoning for prime acreage. They gave zoning for 2, 3, 5 miles out of town. And what has happened with these metropolitan areas since the 60s, 70s, 80s? That dirt that was 3, 4, 5, 10 miles out of town, that was kind of out there and no one really cared about it, that's prime acreage today. Those are the best suburbs today. Those are the best school districts today. And so what you find is, with a lot of these manufactured home communities, you're aligned to the best school district in the market. You're in the best neighborhoods, or across the street from some of the best neighborhoods in the market. And so if an operator is paying attention and they can go in and reinvest in those communities, get the amenities, kind of get the curbside appeal where it should be and maintain those, you start to see that, okay, that home that was purchased for $40,000 or $50,000 10 years ago, I can now see how that can resell for $100,000 or $120,000, which is absolutely happening all over America right now in manufactured housing.
All right. So applying some of this historical knowledge and data to your strategy at Havenpark, give us a glimpse into the operating strategy and what you're building.
So it starts with a two-way street of respect. And really, I think we first have to recognize that we cannot, I don't think anybody wants a kind of quote trailer park. I don't think anyone really wants that. The city doesn't want it. Administrators don't want it. Politicians don't want it. The neighbors across the street don't want it. I don't really think investors want it. And I don't think our residents want it. And so really the name of the game is we want quality. We want the best quality, but we still want it to be affordable and attainable for the residents. And so the approach we've taken is it's a two-way street. We are going to do our level best as operators to reinvigorate these communities. A lot of times we purchase them from operators who, maybe they built them 30, 40, 50 years ago. Maybe they inherited it from their parents or their grandparents. And, they just they're not set up to do the ongoing capital improvements. They don't have a CapEx budget. All they know is, hey, we have a little cash flow and we use that to live on. And so, the infrastructure, it has a useful life. It comes to an end. You've got to reinvigorate these properties. You've got to put money back into these properties to continue to make them viable for the future. And here's the good news. When we do that as on our side as operators, that also benefits the residents. And we constantly remind our residents of that. Look, we're going to make some improvements here. We're going to have to recoup some of those costs in terms of, kind of moving those rents. We try to do it in a moderated way, but you are going to see some increase to rents. But look, there's a transfer of value to you. When it comes time for you to move out of this community or sell your home, some life event changes, change in job, maybe you're going to retire, moving into a nursing home, whatever the case may be, when that day comes, you are going to see some accrued equity, significant accrued equity that will come back to you when you sell that home. And so, our mission is to provide attainable housing for, we call it responsible residents across America. We feel like, we try to be responsible, conscious, concerned operators that are doing the right thing. And we expect our residents to do the same. And the reason for that, and what you find is residents want that. Residents want someone who's going to enforce the rules. They don't want to open their door when they leave for work and see their neighbor's lawn overgrown. It's 3 feet and there's 4 tires on the front. They don't want to see that. They want to see some discipline. They want to see some enforced rules. They want to see some improvements. And you find that in most cases, they see how that will help the value of their home. So that's kind of at a very high level. That's really kind of our mission and the opportunity that we see in the space right now.
All right. So you're identifying mobile home communities, trailer parks, and making acquisitions and changing them into communities that have continued reinvestment and potentially a place where families might raise their kids where they might not have felt comfortable in the past.
Yeah, and there's varying degrees of that. A lot of the communities we buy, they've already been run, maintained.
Okay. So so like just performing and non-performing, like different kind of assets, but like an acquisition driven strategy. Are you doing any like de novo, like ground up community development, or is this all focused on like acquire and improve?
Yep. Right now we are focused exclusively on acquire and improve. The one caveat to that is we do, from time to time, we do have the opportunity to do what we call expansion. So
okay,
you may find a property that was initially zoned and entitled for 3 phases. The owner built out the first 2 phases, for whatever reason, never got to that 3rd phase. And we find that we can in most cases, pretty relatively easily go down and get those entitlements, get those permits kind of reissued. And we have done some expansions, and we will continue to do those.
Interesting. So let's talk about like when properties change hands. Like how, like, are realtors coming in and listing properties inside of Havenpark Communities? Is that something that's managed at the community level? Like how does the transfer and sale of properties happen?
And properties, you're saying the actual
Yeah,
homes?
I guess, yeah, actual home. So not using properties. I'm separating. I know it's land lease and home, but transfer of the manufactured home.
Yeah, it really completely depends on the market. There's a very different sales culture, I'll call it, or marketing culture in different parts of the country for manufactured housing. In pockets of the Midwest, there are certain pockets where it's extremely unusual to have a realtor involved in selling the home. And really, it comes down to kind of a for sale by owner efforts by that individual. A lot of operators, and this is something we're looking at, a lot of operators will offer to help the resident kind of market that home and really kind of act as the de facto realtor to help them sell their home if the time's ready. Other parts of the country, it's really no different than selling a stick-built home. We have some communities in kind of the inland Pacific Northwest. One community comes to mind in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, where, I mean, realtors, every home that's sold is brokered by a realtor, and they're listed on the MLS. I mean, it's literally no different than how a home is sold down the street in a subdivision. So it really, your mileage will vary by geography on that one.
So the manufactured housing space is getting more and more attention right now because of the affordability factor. And I recently received an invitation to a manufactured housing presentation, like on the lawn in Washington, D.C. I think there's some other cities that are like trying to attract attention to manufactured. So how is manufactured being talked about and considered in the affordable housing landscape, and potentially a solve to some of this inventory crisis that is, that's weighing on a lot of first time and repeat home buyers?
Well, I think there are two extremely attractive points that manufactured housing can bring to that conversation. The first is obviously the affordability. And there's a lot of analyses. Some people like to look at it as square footage. I'll just give you an example. The average square footage, we brought in about 1,000 homes across our portfolio this year. And those are, full installation. We'll install those and we'll sell most of those. We'll lease some of those as well. But the average home that we brought in is about 1,200 square feet. They will range from 900 all the way up to probably 2,000 on the largest ones, but call it a 1,200 square foot, 3-bed, 2-bath unit. That has a price point of about $75,000 in most of our markets. And so, whether you break that down into square footage or it's just, a 3-bed, 2-bed, 3-bed, 2-bed, that is highly affordable and highly attainable. The second piece is around speed, because manufactured housing by definition can be scaled much quicker. One of the impressive things about this industry is, you go talk to the guys at Champion or Clayton or any number of these, Cavco, any number of these manufacturers, when they see the demand, they're very good at repurposing and reopening, or opening new factories. I mean, it's astonishing the speed at which they can get these up and operating. And most of these factories, they can crank out, 10, 20 floors a day. So you have the ability to scale very, very quickly with manufactured housing. I mean, if you had a 500 site development in most parts of the country right now, logistically, you could have a home installed on every site probably within about a 9-month period. So the ability to scale is really unprecedented. It's really untouched from any other type of mainstream housing.
So in the communities that you are acquiring and operating, are there many residents that are like replacing aged out end of life assets with new assets from the Clayton homes of the world, or is it typically kind of, you keep the manufactured house on the plot for forever and maybe make some improvements over time? How does that kind of end of life process work?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it really comes down to the owner and how they maintain that property, that home. Most of these homes, the frame, the actual infrastructure of the home, it can last a very long time. Now, what I do see in a lot of markets, a lot of our product is in kind of some of the Mountain West markets, and so I'll use that as a reference point. We see this a lot. You'll see homes that were built in the 70s and 80s that are just completely gutted and really completely remodeled on the inside, all new finishes, and they are nice. I mean, they do a very, very good job on the interior finishes. I mean, you may have seen some of these. It's almost like a little clickbait, but there's from time to time you'll see like a record sale for a trailer being sold in Malibu Beach.
I saw that. I've seen that one. Doesn't like Brad Pitt have a house there or something? It's kind of nuts.
Well, it's crazy, but you look at some of those homes, and you can go to Malibu and to other areas in Southern California, the Bay Area, and some of these homes are 1980s models that have just been totally remodeled, and sure enough, they're being sold for $1 million, $500,000, $2 million, and up. So really, it's. But here's kind of the data that we've looked at, and we certainly respect and evaluate the data from the REITs in our space. They're great operators, and then we've crunched our own data as well, and we find that the average home will stay in our community 45 to 50 years. That's kind of the average, and so we'll use that as a proxy for if a home is well maintained, it's probably about a 50-year useful life.
Yeah, I'm just thinking as we talk, like there's a waterfront manufactured home community in my hometown in Florida, and I just like pulled up on Zillow, and these are all 300 or 400K refreshed kitchens. Like it's not the trailer park that people might have in their minds.
No, and they're nice. I mean, who wouldn't want to live there?
Yeah, not bad. So do you have competitors who are taking like are there new communities popping up, and like how does that like inventory or dynamic kind of compare to what you're doing at Havenpark?
Yes, there are some brave souls out there who are doing greenfield development.
Why do you say that? Why do you say brave souls?
It's a tough road. It's a tough road to go down. You are facing tremendous NIMBYism pressure, and then once you get that, you do have really a whole host of other hurdles to go through. There's and usually revolving around the utilities. That's typically where you have the biggest sticking points. But the amount of individuals required to kind of coordinate and all come together, and it's over an extended period of time. These greenfield developments. I mean, it's typically start to end. I mean, 2 years is smoking. I mean, that's very fast. A lot of these are 3, 4, 5 years to finally get to a point where you can start to move in homes. And then there are capital constraints. There are financing constraints. There are, just a lot of challenges. And so it's a different model than typically most of kind of most of us, what we're doing as manufactured housing investors. But there are some groups that are doing a just great job at this, and we are seeing for the first time in a long time, probably a couple of decades, we are starting to see I won't say it's significant, but it's not an insignificant amount of new developments for manufactured home communities. So it's definitely on the uptick, trending in the right direction. You see it more in areas where there's typically lower barriers on the zoning or on the development front. There tend to be more in Texas, whereas some markets that are just the red tape is very, very difficult and land is extremely expensive. You see it less often.
I mean, even I'm here in Dallas, and just this past week, Dallas voted to block short-term rentals in a big part of the city, knocked out about 1,000 SFRs from STRs from inventory. So I that was neighborhood pressure. That was a little a flavor of NIMBYism. But like one of the conversations on any type of real estate regulation is tax base. So like, is there an attractive like municipal tax base for enabling and zoning zoning considerations on the manufactured community side?
I think that's probably a debatable point, depending on who you're talking to in the industry. I think my experience, and I would suggest that probably this is the case more often than not. They can be tax inefficient for these municipalities. I mean, if a municipality can rather than get 100 acres with manufactured housing on, have that be mixed use and or apartments, or even a single family subdivision, they're probably going to have a bigger revenue base. And I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
The reason why I think you're starting to see some developments actually, happen is just this enormous pressure on, hey, there's nowhere to live. I mean, there's a group, a group of great operator up in Bozeman, Montana. They're doing a development in Bozeman, Montana, and I mean, holy smokes, an entry-level home in Bozeman is pushing $1 million. A one bedroom is $2,500 to rent. And there's literally nowhere to live, nowhere to move. And so it got to the point where the pressure was so immense that, the county finally said, all right, we'll do this. And so, I think at some point, our elected officials are always looking at pain points. When the pain of pressure from no affordable housing becomes greater than, hey, maybe we take a little bit of a haircut on tax. When that happens, I think that's where you start to see, a little more traction.
I mean, when you have communities like Bozeman, where the average home price is shifted towards $1 million, then like suddenly you're pricing out the ability for a functioning economy. You don't have the ability for public service workers or hospitality workers or any type of service industry, period, to like live in driving distance of the businesses and the people who want these services. I mean, that's something that I think that's plagued parts of California for years. And so it's a solution.
In the business community, I mean, I have found the business community oftentimes is championing these developments. They want
workers. They need
they want a place for their workers to live.
Yeah. Really interesting. And so one final question, Robbie. So as I'm like hearing more about the business model and like the pros and cons versus like the acquisition strategy versus greenfield, it's kind of like pointing toward like you can run Havenpark kind of like a traditional like real estate private equity strategy. So you're stepping right into like cash flowing communities and are able to use leverage in the process. Is that kind of the playbook you run, like real estate private equity as you build this business?
Yeah, I mean that's a kind of tried and tested model. We are not a private equity shop, but we're certainly we do take private capital and And that is the plan. Our model is really buy, purchase communities that are well located. That's the big thing. Is it a desirable place to live? Is it a desirable school district? And then once we see it's worth it, we'll pour in a lot of capital in the first few years and on an ongoing basis to kind of raise the profile and quality of the community. And then for us, it's a very long-term hold. These are for most of our portfolio, this is a multi-decade hold kind of a strategy.
Really interesting. Robbie, thanks for giving us so much insight into the manufactured housing space and what you're building at Havenpark. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Hey, appreciate it, Clayton. Anytime.
Thank you so much for listening to the Housing News Podcast. Please take a few seconds to rate Housing News on Apple Podcasts. It means a lot for the show, and we really do appreciate and listen to your feedback. Also, we're gearing up for HousingWire Annual in October. Please visit housingwire.com/events for full details about our big annual event in Austin, Texas.